What's going on YouTube? My name is Harrison, I have 2 cats, and I have some thoughts about the Liam Payne situation. But before we get started, go ahead and smash those like and subscribe buttons if you love cats. Now, if you don't know, Liam was one of the founding members of One Direction, the massively popular boy band that began in 2010 on the TV show The X Factor. Admittedly, I was never a fan. I don't know a lot about the band, which makes sense because I was 25 when they formed, so I don't think I was in the target audience. Now, having said that, I can still definitely understand how big of a deal Liam's death is. There were boy bands back in my day when I was an impressionable teenager at the turn of the century. I may have started putting gel in my hair and dyeing my tips blonde, even though I didn't listen to the bands, because that's a power that they have to influence the culture that young people are participating in. Now, I didn't do this because the Backstreet Boys or NSYNC. Oh no. I did this because of a band called LFO, who gained prominence with a song called Summer Girls. So I absolutely understand the impact that a band like One Direction can have on people. And I hope that there are some One Direction fans watching this video, because I'm sure y'all are looking for answers to help you understand what happened to Liam. Here's a good-looking guy, adored by fans all around the world, with more money than any of us could ever imagine having. So why in the world would he be all messed up on drugs and alcohol, smashing his laptop, destroying his hotel room, and having the cops called on him? And why would he kill himself? Now, there is some question about whether or not he intentionally jumped from his hotel room balcony. I have read some articles in the past week where an unnamed source said Liam would never kill himself and that he was so happy. So let's go ahead and get to the heart of this video, because I believe that I have a unique perspective on this situation that will hopefully help you as a member of the 1D community, as well as all the rest of us as members of the human community, learn something from Liam's life that'll allow us to help people avoid the fate that was waiting for this young man at the end of his life. If you're new to my channel, welcome. If you're not new, welcome back. I make videos about the problems that people have in their lives and the problems that exist in society from the perspective of childhood trauma. Because of the experiences that I've had in my life, I firmly believe that our adult experiences are massively influenced by the experiences that we have in childhood. And what I hope to accomplish with this channel is to wake people up to the reality that we are all caught in the trap of an intergenerational disease known as toxic shame. So what does that mean? What is toxic shame? Toxic shame is essentially the belief that there's something wrong with you. People with toxic shame carry this feeling at the core of their very being that they are defective. And there's different ways that this feeling can get passed down from the parents to the child. That's what I mean when I say that it's intergenerational. And I'm going to be talking about how exactly I think Liam got it later in the video. What I want you to understand right now is that one of the primary ways that we can see from the outside that somebody has this core belief on the inside is if they have a drug addiction or alcohol addiction, any kind of addiction really, as well as depression, anxiety, and suicidal ideation. These are all different ways that toxic shame manifests in a person's life. Now, the prevailing narrative around his death right now is that Liam was happy and he wouldn't kill himself, but because of all the drugs and alcohol that he had in his system, he was in a psychotic state and accidentally walked off of his balcony, which I think is a ridiculous theory. This is the article that I read a few days ago where an unnamed source says Liam didn't have to die. Liam didn't want to die. He had promised all of us that he would never commit suicide. He was looking forward to the future. If someone had called an ambulance when he collapsed in the hotel lobby, instead of taking him back to his room and leaving him in there alone in a psychotic state, he would still be with us. If Liam was in a psychotic state, he didn't know what he was doing. He could have been trying to leave his room and went to the balcony thinking it was the room exit and accidentally fell. Whoever said this is in a serious state of shock, because none of this is true. Maybe, possibly, some person, somewhere, at some time, could have gotten so high that they thought they could fly and jumped off a building. Sure. It's possible. But when you take this incident out of isolation and consider it within the totality of Liam's life, especially when you examine the circumstances leading up to that fateful night, I don't think you can reasonably come to any conclusion other than he went over that railing on purpose with the intention of ending his life. There's no doubt in my mind that's what happened. This guy has gone on multiple podcasts over the past few years and said that he had frequently thought about ending his life. And now I kind of want to take a detour here from talking about about Liam and say that I don't think this is all that unusual in our society. Yes, Liam had problems that were unique to his lifestyle. He was wildly successful, which I'm sure comes along with a lot of stress. But the reality is that we all experience our own forms of stress. Stress itself is a normal part of life, and we have to learn how to cope with it. Now, the main way we learn how to do this is by watching how our primary caregivers handle stress when we're children. And that's a major point that I'm going to keep coming back to and hammering on throughout the rest of this video. Regardless of what your job is, super mega rich and famous pop star, or guy that lives with his mom and 4 cats, no girlfriend, no wife, no friends, no life, you have to know how to handle stress. The big problem that I think we're realizing now is that people who are raised by emotionally immature parents that couldn't regulate their emotions don't know how to regulate their emotions because nobody ever taught them how. They don't know how to handle the natural ebb and flow of life. And yes, you can pretend that you're okay for a while, but as you continue to live, it seems like the facade gets harder and harder to maintain. And eventually, something's gonna give. At that point, people can either ask for help or they can do the other thing. And this is exactly where Liam was at. Just in the past few months, it seems like things had gotten really bad for him. His record label had dropped him. His model ex-girlfriend had sent him a cease and desist order after he refused to stop contacting her and her family, which it looks like he was doing because she's actually in the process of publishing a fictional novel about a model that dates a member of a boy band who turns out to be really abusive. And she's been very vocal about the fact that he's been emotionally abusive and manipulative.
But I always felt like it was so that I could continue to feel bad for him. And because he would always message me ever since we broke up, like, oh, I'm not well. He would always play with death and be like, well, I'm gonna die. I'm not doing well. He would text my mom, I'm not doing well. Have Maya contact me because I wouldn't respond. And it's just always the same cycle. And every time that, like, for example, when I announced my book, he did the same thing. He called my mom. I think I'm not going to be around much longer. In the end, I felt like it was a manipulation. And I'm like, especially after everything you've done, I've told you to leave me alone.
Now, I'm not saying that she shouldn't speak her truth or write that book. My point is that even Liam's relationship with her is part of a larger pattern that begins in his childhood. And in my opinion, he probably was abusive to a certain extent, but so was she. This is one of the things I learned when I started to read about the effects of intergenerational abuse. Hurt people tend to attract other hurt people. And so I think that for him knowing that this book is about to come out and having his record label just recently drop him turned up the pressure to levels that he had never experienced before. And that's what fueled the drug use and caused his erratic behavior the night he died, not the drug use causing the behavior and then his death. And also, I don't think that he ever really had a healthy relationship with the superstardom that One Direction brought him. I read that he regretted not being able to be anonymous and that he wished he had gone to college like his classmates from grade school. Now, one of the things I learned about this guy as I was doing research for this video is that he's really honest about his feelings, which is something I admire. I think Liam himself gives us the best insight into his frame of mind, which otherwise may have been somewhat of a mystery, you know? He's been very open about the fact that he started drinking while he was locked in his hotel room between public appearances.
When we were in the band, the best way to secure us, because of how big it got, was just lock us in our rooms. And of course, what's in the room? Minibar. So at a certain point, I thought, well, I'm going to have a party for one. And that just seemed to carry on throughout many years of my life. And then you look back, how long you've been drinking and stuff, you're like, Jesus Christ, that's a long time.
And so I think the experiences that he had in his short adult life exacerbated the underlying problems that had been inside of him since childhood. His emotional foundation was never really that solid, and as the money and the women and the very natural stress of life began to be piled up high on top of it, it was always destined to crumble. This is why I think that it's wrong to say that if only an ambulance had come to get him after he collapsed in the lobby of the hotel, he'd still be alive today. I think that Liam was on a collision course with that moment long before that night, and it was inevitable with his upbringing that he was going to struggle in life, no matter how famous or not famous he was. So let's turn back the clock and go back to his childhood so that we could talk about the universal aspects of Liam's life that affect all of us, so that we could transform his death from the tragedy that it is right now into his final gift to his fans. Because if we are able to examine his life and and understand his death in a certain way, you can learn something from the struggles that Liam had with drugs and alcohol and depression and suicide. And if you stay with me, I think that you'll see that even though he's gone, he's still able to touch us by allowing us to use the story of his life to learn about our own. Now I'm going to lay out the general premise of my theory about what really caused Liam's death. And as you probably figured out by now, it's toxic shame, which is very strongly connected to an inability to regulate emotions and cope with the normal stressors that we all have to deal with in life. The reality is that we all have bad things happen to us. It doesn't matter if we're famous or not. The people that we love are gonna die. We are all gonna make mistakes and say things that hurt the people we care about. And we all inevitably fall short of the goals that we've set for ourselves. You may get fired from a job that you really liked, and that might make you depressed. And in that depression, you might reach for the bottle or the pills. But you have to have the ability within yourself to partake in those substances without getting addicted. This is kind of what happened with Liam when One Direction broke up. And even though he went on to have a pretty successful solo career, he was worth about $50 million when he died. It wasn't enough to make him feel good inside. And that's why he was never quite able to put down the drugs and alcohol. I think that the truth is nothing ever would have been enough to make him feel like he was enough. And this is the heart of the lesson that Liam can teach us, because this is a feeling that anybody can have. It doesn't matter if you're actually successful or not. You could be making hundreds of millions of dollars a year. You could be very famous. Everybody could love you, but you would still feel like a failure inside. So the question is, where does that feeling come from? How could Liam have all of that fame and all of that money and still kill himself? This is the question I posed to myself last week when I heard about his passing. My assumption was that it had something to do with his childhood, because that's how I think about everything. So I started digging into the internet, trying to get as much information as I could about the earliest years of Liam's life to see if my theory was correct. And you might as well call me Harry Thomas, because from the very moment he was born, Liam had extremely serious health issues that took years for doctors to resolve. You can go to his Wikipedia page and see for yourself that he was born 3 weeks premature and had to spend a lot of time in the hospital just so he'd survive. He himself said in an interview that he was basically born dead. And in those very first years of his life, he had to get 32 shots in his arms every morning and every evening to try and make him better. Now, don't just listen to these facts. Put yourself in his place. Feel how traumatic that would be if that was you. When you were a little child, new to the world and vulnerable, to have the very first experiences of your life being poked and prodded, to be in and out of hospitals for years, not knowing what's going to happen to you. And I wonder how much of that time he spent alone, away from his parents during those crucial early years. How many nights did he sleep alone in the hospital as an infant without his parents there to care for him, because he had to be under observation for this mysterious illness? Eventually, he does get better. When he was 4 years old, a doctor figured out that one of his kidneys was scarred and wasn't functioning properly, and then he got the care that he needed. So the question we have now is, how could these health issues that occurred when he was just a little boy lead to his death 31 years later? Especially because he got better. He didn't die from kidney failure. He jumped off a balcony. So what the heck do these two things have to do with one another? This is where I call in the big guns. The legendary John Bradshaw. Bradshaw wrote some of the most incredible books on childhood development that I've ever read. This book right here, Homecoming, changed my life. I think it's the best book that he's written. I'm also currently going through Healing the Shame That Binds You, which is really good so far. And what he teaches is that the most crucial period for the development of the inner resources that a person uses later in life to regulate their emotions and cope with stress takes place in the first 3 years of life. And without a doubt, the most important thing a baby can get to facilitate the building of those inner resources is a healthy bond with an emotionally stable caregiver, which would ideally be the mother. And if that bond isn't formed, if it's interrupted by, I don't know, let's say months in the hospital because the baby's born with a serious health complication that the doctors can't seem to figure out, an inner security will form inside of that person, and they will always feel on some level unwanted. Now, admittedly, I don't know what Liam's relationship with his parents was like, and I don't know what their relationship was like with one another. The closest I could get to figuring this out was in this article where it says that Liam had suffered serious trauma in his childhood, a shadow from which he felt that he could never escape, and whose full details the male has chosen not to publish, with one friend even saying that he had demons from his formative years that he never quite got over. Boom! This is exactly what I'm talking about. Now, I feel like some people are going to counter this argument by saying, well, he had a good relationship with his parents. They were in the Story of My Life music video. Or he had a good relationship with his mom. She cried about him in that One Direction documentary. To which I would say, those things don't really tell us anything about the interpersonal relationship that he had with his mom and dad. I need to know about the formative years of his life. What was it like to be a little boy in his house when he was 7 years old? And this is an area that maybe some of you diehard Directioners know something about. Let me know down in the comments if you actually know something about his childhood. Not if you think he had a good relationship with his family, but if you actually know about a story of something happening from when he was a kid, good or bad. Tell us. Because what I'm trying to do here is put together all the pieces of this guy's life so that we can see the real Liam, not the image that's presented to us on social media. I want to see him for the complex individual that he really was. This is why I put so much emphasis on his actual words, because that's not a curated image that his publicist put out or an advertising agency created. Liam himself was telling us about his inner struggles when he'd go on podcasts and say that he's thought about leaving this world.
Certain circumstances, I'm quite lucky to be here still, which is something I've never really shared with anyone.
Explain.
I can't go too deep into it because I don't really know how I feel about it myself. But there's times where that level of loneliness and people getting into you every day, like I say, just every so often you're like, when will they send? That's almost nearly killed me a couple of times.
As
when
in
I've been in a
you've
bad
wanted
place. Yeah, when I've been in a bad place, 100%. You know, there's no point denying it. It's definitely been on the menu a couple of times in my life, and
this is enough. I don't want to be here anymore.
Yeah, 100%, man.
Which I think is an incredibly brave thing to admit. It is not easy to be that vulnerable. Even in our so-called modern society here in America, we still don't really accept that men have feelings and that it's okay for them to cry and it's okay to feel insecure and it's okay to ask for help. And I think that's a large part of the reason why suicide is the #1 cause of death for men under the age of 50. I think that Liam spent a lot of his life feeling alone. I think that these feelings came from the earliest years of his life when he was in the hospital and he was just a little infant crying out in the night for his parents who weren't there to comfort him. I think this experience drove the idea deep down into his unconscious that he was helpless and alone. And I think these feelings got worse as he got older. And so he turned to drugs and alcohol in order to soothe that inner pain. The ability to self-soothe is the most important factor in determining if a person that uses drugs or alcohol will become addicted to drugs or alcohol. And once again, it is the parents that teach the child how to self-soothe by modeling that behavior through their actions. I think that Liam's parents probably had a tumultuous relationship when he was growing up, judging by the fact that Liam seemed to have some difficulties with intimacy. We learn how to be intimate by watching how our parents are intimate with one another. If they are abusive or manipulative, we will be abusive or manipulative. And so I think that I've explained from my point of view what happened to Liam. Now I want to turn the conversation to you. Do you identify with any of the feelings or experiences I've talked about in this video? Do you struggle with drugs or alcohol addiction? Do you self-harm or think about suicide? I think that the most important lesson we can take from Liam's life is that these things don't just magically happen. They have a source, and that source is childhood. It's the experiences that you had when you were young and how your parents treated you when you were growing up. Were you blamed or shamed? Were you abandoned or neglected? Were you assaulted or were you just ignored? Did you grow up in a dysfunctional family like I did, where your parents didn't really love one another? Those experiences have far-reaching effects on a person's life that go much further than what we've ever acknowledged as a society. I think that most people still carry the wounds from their childhood experiences inside of them. I know that I did. until I got help. And I think that Liam was asking for help each time he talked about wanting to die. And I truly believe that in his final act, he has given us the opportunity to wake up from our ignorance about the devastating effects of our childhood trauma on our adult lives. And I think this really makes him a hero. He gave his life so that we might save ours. Because there are people out there right now struggling with the exact same feelings that he struggled with. And they need to hear this information so that they can begin to put the pieces of their lives together. And he facilitated this conversation. We wouldn't be talking about this right now if it wasn't for him. You would not be sitting here watching this video if it wasn't for Liam. And I'd like to think that at least one person is going to see this video and this kind of content, and it's going to save their life, because all of this information is going to make sense of some painful mystery they have inside. And they're going to say, oh, that's why I keep having these thoughts. Or that's why I keep getting into these abusive relationships, because I'm carrying this toxic model for love inside of me that my parents gave me. And so if that's you, if you're struggling, if you need help, or if you just want to learn more, join my community. And together we can work to change our society so that what happened to Liam never happens to anybody else ever again. Now, if you enjoyed this video, go ahead and smash that like button with your forehead, hit the subscribe button with your big toe, and turn on notifications however you can so you don't miss any of my amazing upcoming content. And I will see y'all next time. Take care, be safe, and never forget what I always say.